orange are at risk of extinction, the ones in yellow are of special concern, and the ones in green are low or no risk at this time, and the gray ones are status not determined. Virtually all of the Puget Sound natural Chinook are a fraction of their former abundance. Of 31 historical populations, 9 are now extinct. Of the Puget Sound Chinook populations, when we began the study, there were upwards of 500,000 Puget Sound fish. This graph depicts, in the early years, just the catches, and in the more recent years, the catches and the escapements, showing the total biomass or bio-number of Chinook salmon in the habitat. It's obviously declined. Coastwise, if you look carefully at this graph, you'll see that California provided a big contribution. The west coast of Vancouver Island also. We've got Columbia River is another big producer at intervals. But all have been on sort of downward decline. If this were the stock market, we'd be very concerned. And upwards of 3.5 million fish caught coastwide, and less than 1 million in some years recently. This red line is the bottom line for the whale survival. You take just the southern resident orca population requires over 500,000 Chinook salmon in a year for feeding. This is our population graph since our study began in 1976. We've had approaching in the mid-90s, approaching 100 whales.
So the top graph there is the number of orcas in the southern resident population.
To 2001, and we've sort of been waffling around there in the 80s since then.
The correlation to these graphs are that
where the captures began in the 1960s.
When the decline of the salmon started happening, so did the decline of the whales. So they coalition between the two.
But not the natural mortality, so there certainly were over 100, probably 112 to 120 in the 60s. California to British Columbia Chinook harvest in the 19...
I'm just going to stop the video there for a second just to help you guys understand a little bit about the correlation between the salmon stock as well as the fish-eating orcas. It's important that they obviously have their food source. These mammals are consuming almost 400 pounds of fish a day, and if they don't have that food source, they're not able to survive. Earlier on the graph before was showing the live captures. A lot of people have seen killer whales at SeaWorld and different aquariums around the world. Those whales were captured off of Vancouver Island. And when those whales were captured, it left generation gaps in the population of southern residents. So if those whales were still here today, it's quite possible that the numbers would be up there, up on higher levels. But unfortunately, those whales were taken away. And when they did take those whales away, they took away prime breeding stock, meaning they took the females. The females were easier to handle, easier to capture. They also took the smaller whales because they were easier to transport. And when they got them into aquariums, out of every 20 whales that were captured off of Vancouver Island, the ratio of survival was only about 5 of the 20 actually survived. They were hoping that by taking the females that they would also breed in captivity. And that has been successful and unsuccessful. The portion of those whales that are gone, meaning that if they were there, those prime females would have brought up the numbers. But because of the lack of salmon, whether the species would have survived with a lack of food source is one of the questions that we are still trying to figure out right now. I'll let this video play on a bit.
Hundreds was enormous. There were 7.5 million fish from the Columbia River alone. That's Chinook fish. Beginning in 1932 until 1973, over 400 dams were constructed on the Columbia, and that harvest, as you can see, the dark blue, has drastically diminished following the dam construction.
I'll just stop that for a sec there, just so everybody understands. The electricity provided for Seattle area, Puget Sound, as well as areas on Vancouver Island were done by hydro dams. And when they covered the rivers, the salmon were unable to get up the rivers to complete their life cycle, thus taking more food away from the fish, or sorry, from the whales, pardon me. So what Ken is talking about here in this particular study is the decline in the salmon stocks in that general area, also creating a less stock of whales. These whales are heavily filled with toxins. A lot of the stuff that ends up in the ocean is absorbed into the small phytoplankton and microplanktons, and it works its way up to the food chain. The top of the food chain are killer whales in all oceans. And it's one thing to understand that if these killer whales are the sentinels for humans, meaning that these whales have a problem, then we too, as humans, will be having a problem. There was a killer whale that beached itself off of Vancouver Island. It was a transient killer whale. When they did the narcopsy on that particular mammal, it was 2% away from being classed as toxic waste. And what I'm telling you right now is, if that animal was 2% more, it would not have been able to be burned. It would not have been able to be buried in the ocean or into a ground. It would have been chopped up into small bits, put into barrels, and put into a site, which is a toxic waste site. This is a marine mammal off of Vancouver Island. If you see pictures of Vancouver Island in our area, it is a very beautiful area. It's green, lush. You can drink the water out of the rivers, but the oceans are having problems. And a lot of those things are due to PCBs, lead, mercury, and DDTs. These are chemicals that have been used in the rice fields. These are chemicals that have been used all over the world in many different industries. And it works its way down the food chain. So these killer whales, being very high toxicity levels, if they have a bad year of fishing and they start to reduce their body fat, then they start getting into toxic waste and they start having problems. And this is one of the big declines on the southern resident population due to toxics in the ocean. So it's really important to keep the environment clean.
Prior to the dams, our family was more numerous, and obviously so were the coastal Chinook. Life was fabulous. The recent coastwide U.S. Chinook population trends have upwards of 4 million in some years. For example, 1989, 3.5 million in 2004, but they obviously go up and down in cycles. This graph depicts all the populations between the Central Valley of California and Puget Sound, both catches and escapements. But now life is not so good. The alternative is even worse. But we're not going to dwell on that. On the bright side, we still visit Greater Puget Sound occasionally, and sometimes we find fish. Unfortunately, the fish are toxic. It is said that some people wonder whether we are as smart as humans.
I'm sure everybody's familiar with the nuclear plant that went down in Japan. Right now, the fish that are showing up off Vancouver Island are filled with radiation, and we're concerned about our marine mammals. Right now we have mass strandings going off on the Pacific Ocean all over the world, and a lot of the whales are being found with high radiation levels. It's quite possible, as I mentioned, these guys are the sentinels for us. We really have to be concerned about the fish that we're consuming and where it's coming from. So it's something that you might want to be concerned of as well for your own diets as well. This video was done prior to that particular incident in Japan.
We don't know the answer to that. Obviously, some people are very smart.